Since my parents put me in Boy Scouts as a kid, I fell in love with anything outdoors, like camping and hiking. One thing I could never do, though, was hunt and fish. So when I say the outdoors, that includes wildlife, too. My dad tried to take me hunting once and I cried. So I could teach you to live out in the wilderness on your own, but we would be living on a vegetarian diet. Sorry. So, anyways, as a kid, I would walk around our backyard as it ran along some trees and always had my own little adventure out there. And as I got older, I would go to different parks and trails to challenge myself and learn more. I had a fair share of friends, but not many that were as hyped about hiking as I was. People start craving meat and Wi-Fi after a few days without it. So I found myself going solo, but I was never quite alone. I always brought along my dog, Parker. Parker was a lab, and I got him when he was just a puppy from a friend of my mom's. I worked hard with training him because I wanted to be able to take him with me on these trips and be off leash for it too. I know there are some parks that require a leash, and I still brought it, but if we were deep in the back where there were rarely any people, I let him off. He was very well behaved. He loved being able to run as fast as he can through the trees and jump into water, and he wouldn't hurt anyone. There are plenty of kids that have stopped us before to pet him, and he would sit and patiently wait till they were done. He wouldn't even growl when playing with me. He's always a blast to have tagging along on these adventures of mine. After I finished college, I wanted to go on a trip to some of the best hiking trails I had found. This was going to take me through a couple of states, so I planned on taking at least a month or so. We made it through 2 parks and had a great time too. I made some friends that actually gave me their info because they actually wanted to meet up and do the same thing. I got a few suggestions of places to add to my list as well, and overall just had a great time. It was the third one that really messed up the whole mood of the trip. I don't want to give specifics for privacy reasons on a few sides, but I will say it was in a western state. This park had a huge hiking trail that had campgrounds scattered around, as some people would stop and rest and continue on the next day. There was even an area for rock climbing instead of taking the path all the way around to the top. I loved rock climbing, but I rarely did it since I had Parker with me. My friends joked about me getting a harness to put him on my back, but I think with how heavy he is, that wouldn't be possible or safe. So we just enjoyed the scenery and would walk our way around. The sun was starting to set, and I started noticing people setting up little camps, but I didn't want to be around others, so I tried to push forward some more to be a little more alone. It was getting dark at this point, but I got further up and couldn't hear people anymore, so I decided to stop there. I set up my little tent, pulled out something to eat for me and Parker. Don't worry, he wasn't a vegetarian, and we settled in for the night. Now, most of the time, I don't have trouble sleeping outdoors. The sounds of just crickets or the wind was enough to knock me out, but for some reason, that night, I could not shake this feeling. I tossed and turned for a while, not seeming to be able to get comfortable. The bigger problem I had with this, though, was that Parker was awake too. He was looking at one side of the tent, mouth closed, with his head tilted. It was normal for us to have deer or raccoons walking around, so I figured that's what caught his attention. But that also doesn't normally keep me awake. I decided to peek out there to see what it was though, and maybe scare it off so we could both get some sleep. Parker was quick to run out of the tent, but there was nothing around and not even a sign of anything. Nothing had been moved or touched. Parker had even seemed surprised when there was nothing there but us. So we went back to the tent and tried to sleep again without much luck. I felt like I was being watched, like the feeling you get when you know someone is behind you, looking over your shoulder. It was quite an uncomfortable feeling. I finally fell asleep at some point, probably because the exhaustion outweighed my paranoid mind, and managed to sleep for a few hours. When we got up the next morning, we looked around our spot again and saw no signs of anything entering. I just chalked it up to me being paranoid again and not sleeping very well, and told myself I needed to drink more water. So we packed up and moved on. As we got a few hours in, we started running into people that we hadn't seen before. I assumed they were probably there the night before and was at that point ahead of me and had stopped again for a break. They actually had a few kids with them, with probably enough strollers and harnesses for them not to be walking, but to me, that just seemed excessive. I feel this was far too out of the way to take kids so young where you don't know how they could even react to some things out here. Not to mention how loud they were. I'm sorry, people that go to places like that and treat it like it's just a normal public park drive me crazy. Again, I liked being out there to escape civilization, and that stuff ruined it for me. So I tried to get ahead of them as quickly as I could and get back to zoning out alone. It seemed like I had finally gotten past the bulk of the people, as I hadn't seen anyone for a while, and probably wouldn't see many more at this point, or at least none with kids, as the path became less visible and more just gravel. With the amount that I had left of the trail, I estimated that I could get close to the end, stay one more night, and then leave. That way I didn't risk walking on the trail in the dark. As we climbed up the trail, I started feeling on edge again, the same way I did the night before. So my first thought again was to look around for wildlife, but when I saw nothing, I became more on edge, wondering if there was someone hiding nearby. It wouldn't be the first time someone was robbed in a park like this. However, I don't take much with me of value other than my dog and a knife that my dad gave me, but people are still dangerous. So I started paying closer attention to my surroundings to make sure nothing caught me by surprise. After a few of not running into anyone or anything, I thought again I was just getting paranoid since I was so secluded. But that's when I started hearing someone crying. It sounded like a really small child. My first thought was I was actually going to run into someone with a baby up here, but when the trail flattened out and I didn't see anyone, it just added to the confusion. But at this point, I was now racking my brain where the crying was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from the brush off the side of the trail. That kicked in my ranger mode, and I was worried that someone may be lost or injured. So I broke off from the trail to go into the dense trees. Sure enough, the crying got louder. I marked my trail however I could by marking the trees, leaving the flags I had with me, things like that, so I could get back easily. The crying got louder, but I didn't find anyone. I stood in the middle of these trees looking around, trying to hone in better where they were. Now, Parker has been beside me this whole time, and I can tell he could hear the crying too by the way he stops panting and cocks his head to the side. So while I'm standing there, I look down at him to see him on all fours looking around. He wasn't sitting and waiting like he does when I normally stop. He looked ready to move. He did this when we were playing fetch or when he was impatiently waiting for me to tell him to follow or something. This also made me realize it wasn't just me. So I gave him the signal to lead the way, and immediately he was looking around, sniffing the ground, and was on a mission. He led me to a pile of dead leaves and branches that looked like it had been purposely put there, like someone was cleaning up and left it there. But it's unusual, at least it had been for me, to see something like that in a national park. That kind of stuff is typically left alone, unless it's close to the trail or something. But when Parker started digging around in it, I did the same. I was horrified thinking of what I could find, but instead, all I found was a baby harness. It was one of those strap ones that you could wear on your back, but what was it doing out there? And where was the owner of this harness? At this point, I was holding the harness, looking to see if it had any tag on it, like a suitcase possibly. I don't have kids, I don't know how it works. When I noticed the crying stopped. I looked around to see if anything changed, but still, no sign of another person. I was thinking I needed to get back and call for help because this could be more serious than it looked. But when I called for Parker to follow, he had his same stance and was looking around. I was curious what else he had, so I told him to lead again. This time, he would stop and look around and whimper, and then keep moving. It started to worry me with how much he started whimpering, but he wouldn't stop to let me check him out to make sure he wasn't hurt or anything. Sadly, he was definitely on the right trail. He led me to a small ravine that dipped down on the other side of a small cliff. He ran past me to a tree that had fallen and was rotting, and when he got to the other side, he sat down by it and barked for me. When I walked over to the side he was on, I found a woman face down in the mud. I immediately checked her pulse, but by how cold she was, I knew she wasn't alive. It was definitely tragic and not something I would ever want to find on a trip like this. But what was more bizarre to me was that she wasn't dressed like she was hiking or camping. She had on like an office suit. It was a nice skirt, one heel, and even a matching blazer. Why was she out there dressed like that? Shaken, I followed my path back to the trail and managed to make my way to one of the emergency systems that they have along the trail and waited on the side for someone to arrive. I led them down to where she was, gave them my statement, and since it was just the two people, I actually helped them move the tree some so they could get her out better. That's when I noticed she was missing an arm. I think they could tell it was too much for me at that point and let me go. I started walking back up to the path and had to tell the cops what all I knew and how I found her. They actually asked me if Parker was a cadaver dog and was surprised when I said he wasn't. I hadn't even thought about it until he mentioned it, like his ability to find her was phenomenal. I actually got a ride back with one of the rangers because at that point I wasn't really in the mood to finish my trip, let alone sleep there. I left them my information and went to a nearby hotel for the night. I called my parents and told them about what happened, and they were asking if I was okay, and also thought what Parker did was amazing. So that really took me out of the mood for the rest of my trip. I told myself as a kid growing up that I wanted to help people and teach others to appreciate nature, but finding someone too late really takes a lot out of you. All I can say is if you're interested in getting into serious backpacking and hiking, make sure you're prepared and that people know where you're going. I really don't think she was out there for fun, but still, it's important to know. And in case anyone was interested, I found a news article about her being found, but they had no information on who she was, but they did mention she was a mother. So then it made me question the harness I found, which I gave to the police as well. And that was the last I ever heard of it. I'm still hiking and camping today with Parker by my side, but I still wonder sometimes where the crying was coming from and where Parker's ability came from. I like to believe that I'm a fairly careful person and that I do a pretty good job keeping myself out of trouble and away from dangerous situations. That said, And as much as I've done a good job at keeping myself safe, I have one thing that happened to me that was genuinely terrifying. And while I wasn't personally hurt, it still messed with my head. It was one of those moments that you never think that you could end up in the middle of, and afterwards, it just kind of sticks with you and creeps up into your mind when you're lying in bed at night. The day this happened was in the middle of summer. I had literally turned 18 a couple days before and had spent a couple days at a friend's house in a nearby town. I was actually driving home in the mid-afternoon. I think it was around 3 or so. I had the windows down and the wind blowing through the car because of how nice it was out, and was just jamming out to some summer pop song, enjoying the drive. As I was driving down a quiet and slightly rural road, I noticed that there was a young woman down the way with her thumb outstretched, which I honestly didn't know that was a thing people did. I thought that whole thumb out on the road was a movie cliche, but there she was. She looked to be in her early 20s, long dark hair and a simple and quite cute sundress. Though I was always warned about the dangers of picking up strangers, something about her seemed harmless. She almost looked like my little sister, just older. So I guess part of me saw some familiarity in her and immediately thought if my sister was out on the road like this, I would want someone to stop for her to see if she was okay. I decided to stop and see if she just needed a quick ride down the road or if she needed to go a long distance. She told me that she was needing a ride to a specific gas station about 10 miles up the road. It was in the direction I was going, and I would have passed by it anyways, so I told her to hop in and said I could get her there. At first, the conversation was incredibly casual and friendly. She told me her name, I told her mine. We chatted about the weather and how absolutely gorgeous it was outside that day. She made a comment about the song that was playing on the radio. I don't remember what song it was, but it was some top 40 one, and she was nodding along to it while singing quietly. She even told me a bit about who she was, how she was a bit of a vagabond, and was doing an experiment to see how far she could go on the kindness of others. This was before van living was a thing, so it was a bit of a foreign concept to me, and I was shocked that it was working out the way it was for her. After a bit of chatting and friendly back and forth, she started talking about how she liked to listen to true crime podcasts and such. It started with her saying that being out and alone like this, she listened to them to be aware of the horrible things that could happen. But then she started talking more and more about various murders, cold cases, and such to the point that I could tell that she was obsessed. I don't mind true crime stuff. It's not my favorite, but I was willing to hear her out because she was clearly passionate about them. However, it shifted from her talking about the podcast to talking about very specific cases in very, very vivid detail. The way that she got excited when she talked about the people dying made me feel a bit uneasy, to say the least. She then turned to me and literally asked, "What do you think it feels like to die?" If she had just made the comment, it would have been one thing, but she said it, turned to me, and just stared at me like she really wanted an answer. I sort of just stammered and mumbled that I didn't know, and that I guess it would just be painful. She laughed and commented that it would probably be the best feeling you could have because, in her words, it would be the final explosion at the end of all the buildup and hype. Then it got worse. She turned back to me and said, "I wish I could find out what it felt like without actually dying." And she seriously smiled at me, like she was expecting me to volunteer to help her. I just sort of said, "Huh, yeah," and tried to keep going without making eye contact, thinking that maybe she would get how creepy she was being. But she followed up with, "If I asked you to help me, would you?" I was pretty obviously taken aback, and told her that I wouldn't be able to help her and said sorry, and that I just kind of wanted to focus on driving. She sort of fell back into her seat and said, "All right," before just turning to focus back on the road ahead of us. This made the whole situation feel super awkward and heavy. Like, how do you come back from that kind of comment? Well, her idea of coming back from the comment was to literally throw the door open and jump out of the car while I was going 50 down the road. She literally opened the door, undid her seatbelt, and just jumped out onto the road while I was going full speed. I slammed my brakes and screamed as she jumped, the whole situation playing out in a horrible series of chaotic seconds. I threw the car in park and grabbed my cell phone before running out and checking on her. She was pretty messed up, but was definitely still breathing. I called 911 and told them about what happened. They sent out an ambulance and a few police officers, as this was definitely a suspicious situation. For some reason, the memory of them lifting her onto the stretcher to get her into the ambulance is seared in my brain. Just seeing them try to lift her gently so as to not further her injuries. I could tell that she had broken a few things though, and it was not pretty. I explained to the police about how she wasn't a friend and how I had just picked her up and was giving her a ride. They looked at me like I was crazy. Part of me thinks they were debating whether or not they were thinking I shoved her out of the car. I explained what she said right before she jumped. After a while, I think they got the idea, and maybe they realized with how distraught I was that it wasn't my doing. They did call me back a day or two later to come in and give an official statement, and I was actually informed that they were treating it as an attempted suicide and that they were needing my statement to help get her into a mental health hold. I gave them what they asked for, and that was the end of it. I have no idea what happened to this girl, and I'm terrified to think that she may not be with us anymore. She was such a sweet young lady when we started talking, but she switched over to the crazed person in literally a second. I hope they were able to get her the help she needed, and she was able to continue on her trip to wherever she was going. But this event made me realize that I should be more cautious about not judging a book by its cover. One of my friends and I used to get together at least once a month and go hiking in one of the forests near us. We even made a few trips into a local national park because we wanted to get through all of the trails. The one by us has a few different paths in it that can take some time to get through, so we dedicate each trip to one path. However, that's also because we tend to divert off that trail so we can get away from the groups of people and tourists and actually look around and enjoy the view. This event actually occurred one of those times we were going through that very park. We gathered our normal bag of gear that we took with us, like water, a couple of snacks, a few emergency items like a small knife, first aid kit, things like that, and met up at the park. I typically left my cell phone in my car because once we got deep in the trees, it was worthless anyways. My friend Troy, though, always kept his on him even though he had the same result. So we got there and started heading out to the last path we hadn't tried before. This one was a bit more of an incline, so we found ourselves taking a few extra breaks on our way through. It was also towards the beginning of summer and was super humid that day, so I know that was probably part of it. So we stopped and waited for people to pass and looked around to try and find a good place to divert from the path. We finally found one as we estimated where the lake would run and decided we wanted to head towards that. We walked over by some trees, past a pile of dead branches and other debris, and were now no longer in view of the path. The trees provided us some shade too, which made it a little easier on us as well. I don't feel like it was long after this point that we ended up running into this guy. We were laughing and joking about something, and we were pretty loud about it when I saw this guy just standing in front of this tree. I nudged my friend to get their attention, and they stopped and looked at them with me. The guy didn't even look back at us, and the way he was dressed was even more bizarre to me. He had on one of those thick, puffy jackets with some really dirty and ripped up jeans. He also had some long hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in a while, as you could see the huge knot in the back of it. I didn't know what to do, so I just apologized for disrupting him, and when he still said nothing or looked over, I motioned for my friend to walk around him so we could keep going. As we did, I looked back to see his face and noticed it looked just as dirty. But it was the look on his face that confused me even more. He looked very cross, like he was trying to remember something or was extremely angry about something. Curious to know if he really was mad or possibly injured or lost, I asked him if he was okay and didn't get a response. As my friend was telling me not to, I decided to approach him and get a better look at him. Still, he did not take his angry look off the tree in front of him. When I got closer, I also noticed that the dirt on his face looked flaky, like it was dried blood. So I again asked him if he was okay and if he needed any help. Still nothing. My friend kept saying we needed to go and that he was freaking him out, but part of me didn't feel right leaving him. So I pulled out my extra bottle of water and a bag of trail mix and set it next to the tree. As I started walking back, that's when I heard the guy mumbling something, so I turned back around, thinking he was talking to me. He was just mumbling a bunch of nonsense though, as I couldn't make out anything he was saying, so I just continued walking back to my friend when he finally said something coherent. Not that it made any sense though. He said, tell me your secrets." Me. What? Him, still staring at the tree. He has secrets. Tell me your secrets. My friend was about ready to leave my ass at this point, so I just turned back and we made a brisk walk away from him. I looked back a few times and he never moved, so we carried on. After a bit of time, we finally got through the trees and we didn't quite make it to the lake, but did find a little offshoot stream of some sort. We sat there for a few, splashed water on our faces, and just chilled for a bit. We noticed the orange and pink in the sky and knew we needed to start heading back, so we started making our way out. As we were walking, I was curious if that guy was still there, so I could report it to someone to let them know, because that definitely wasn't normal, and he probably needed help. I know we took either the same path back or pretty close to it based on the trail of flat grass and dirt we left, so it wasn't hard to trace our steps back, and we definitely found the guy. But he was far from okay. As we approached, it looked like he had his hands on the side of the tree, and we could hear grunts or mumbling as we approached. Again, my friend stayed back while I got closer, and this guy was seriously smashing his head into this same tree repeatedly. There was blood all over his face, his hands, and chest. You could see the blood dripping on his shirt and coat, getting caked into his beard and on the ground in front of him. On top of this, he was now screaming, "Tell me why! Tell me why! What are you hiding?" Over and over with every smash. While this is happening, my friend is yelling behind me, "What the hell are you doing? Don't touch him. What's wrong with him?" And I'm trying to figure out what to do. If this guy doesn't stop soon, he's going to cause some serious damage and even kill himself. I decided to basically pummel him, but it didn't even faze him. He started crawling back to the tree to keep going. I told my friend to run back to get help because I didn't want to leave him alone, but I wasn't going to be able to stop him and make him come with us. My friend didn't waste any time though, and he took off back towards the trails. I tried a few times pulling him away from the tree, but every time he would make his way back to it. With how many times I repeated this insane process, it seemed like my friend got back at record speed. Thankfully, he was accompanied by a park ranger who was able to subdue him enough to get some ties on his wrist and get him to sit on the ground. From there, though, he just rocked back and forth, sitting on the ground as he screamed and cried. Some police showed up too, and we gave them our statement and had to try to convince them that we had nothing to do with him except trying to save his life. And then we were finally allowed to leave. We wanted to see what happened with the guy though, so we sat in my car and waited to see him come out. When they came down to the entrance, the guy was sitting in the back of one of those little trailers the rangers drove around, and he looked out of it. I don't know what happened to him from that point on though. The only other update we got was when a detective called me and asked if I saw anyone else with him, and he mentioned because they had found other items indicating there may have been someone with him. I did tell them that I had left food and water there for them and even mentioned the brand so they knew, and they said that's not what they meant and explained that they had found some clothing and a note. They wouldn't give more information than that, so I assume it's probably important or serious maybe, but I saw nothing else there. So yeah, that was the last time I saw that guy, obviously, and the last time I was ever approached about it, other than when my friend brought it up to remember or tell someone about it. We did go back to that trail that same month. I think it was about 2 weeks after, to see if we could find anything else to tell us what the hell happened. The trail, of course, was different due to new growth, but once we got around the general area, the tree was easy to spot. The tree had bark missing, and there was a gouge in it. It was at the perfect height for someone to be smashing their head into it. It was eerie seeing it, standing right where he was, racking my brain as to what was going on in his head. That was the last time we took that path. My friend thought it was too messed up to look at anymore, so we never went back. I know it's entirely possible the guy was just messed up and there was nothing else to it other than he just needed help, but that is just a scene I can never get out of my head. As you are a kid, summer camp is synonymous with freedom, adventure, and summertime fun. My experience, on the other hand, is nowhere near fun. My time at the summer camp back when I was 12 years old took a horrendous turn just 3 days into camp. When I decided that I wanted to take a hike alone, a decision that quickly turned into the most painful thing I have ever gone through, the summer camp I went to was this neat little Bible-focused place in the middle of the woods, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, Midwest. I had gone to this camp once prior and had no problems. This was my second time going, and because I was 12, I was part of the young teen group. This meant that during the time at the camp, we were given free days to, in their words, find ourselves and adventure into God's glory. Basically, go out into the woods with friends and enjoy nature. Now, I didn't have any friends, which meant that I did my hikes solo. Despite this, these were absolutely one of my favorite days of camp. I loved going out and identifying the plants, the birds, the bugs, and all that. They would give us a checklist that we could fill out for a prize. I never found out what that prize was because I never saw a chipmunk while I was there, which, thinking back, I guess I could have just checked it off and said that I saw one. Tangent aside, I had a great time just being out by myself. It was on one such hike that my day took a sharp turn, both literally and figuratively. Walking along the narrow dirt path, my foot got caught on a large tree root, and I was sent tumbling down into a small gully just to the side of the dirt path. It wasn't a large ditch or anything, but it was enough that the fall was definitely going to hurt. I remember feeling the dirt slip out from underneath me, getting a sudden jolt of pain, and then an overwhelming feeling of fatigue. To put it bluntly, I had fallen down and somehow hit my head and basically knocked myself out cold. When I woke up, the forest seemed really weirdly silent and like it was spinning. Dazed, I tried to piece together what exactly had happened. I was lying face down on the ground, my arm throbbing in pain. I was incredibly confused and woozy for all of 10 seconds, which is when the real pain kicked in. A burning sensation spread across my face and arm. The intensity of it was enough to make me jump up to my knees from where I was lying. I brushed my hand across my face to figure out why I was in so much agony, when I came to a horrifying realization. Fire ants. I had fallen face first into a fire ant mound. I started screaming, my shouts echoing through the woods as I jumped up and sprinted back to camp, slapping and brushing at my face and arms in a desperate attempt to get the ants off my skin. The pain just kept feeling like it was getting worse and worse, and I just remember thinking for some reason that they were burrowing under my skin. That's how bad it hurt. When I got back to the camp, one of the counselors saw what was going on and immediately rushed me to the shower room, not wasting a moment to get my clothing off and blasting me with cold water from one of the detachable shower heads. Each and every drop of that water was a small bit of relief as it washed away the ants. I literally sobbed as I watched those little bastards go down the drain. Of course, that wasn't the end of it. I don't know if you know this, but fire ants contain a venom called piperidine. Something I looked up while I was typing this out. It's a nasty venom that, when you get too much of it in you, such as when you're stung by hundreds of these suckers, can and will cause some major issues. This was the day I learned that I wasn't allergic to them, which was probably the only mercy in all of this. I did, however, get horribly sick, throwing up, struggling to sleep through the pain, dealing with other issues. The swelling and blistering on my face were so bad that I could barely open my eyes. I remember one of the kids coming to visit me in the hospital, and he joked that my face looked like a hamburger. That comment alone added a whole new level of terror to this. As mentioned, I wasn't allergic, thankfully. If I were, I can tell you that this story would have had a much more grim ending, one that someone else would have had to have written. I was left with a number of scars from the blistering and scabbing on my face, and I still actually have these scars all this time later. The right side of my face is definitely not my good side, is all I have to say to that. To this day, I cannot stand the sight of ants, each tiny little bugger reminding me of that hike and what they're capable of. I guess all I can say is, if you decide to go hiking out alone on a summer day, try to watch your step. And if you see a mound of dirt that is teeming with activity, just stay away from it, because the consequences might just leave you scarred. So that, my friends, was a collection of creepy hiking stories. Kind of had things from all over, from things found, things witnessed, hitchhikers, and ants. Nothing good comes from ants. Like, I'm okay with most bugs, but I don't see the benefit of ants, unless you can tell me otherwise. Okay, so I was just informed that ants do have a purpose. Apparently, they help aerate the soil. But there's no soil in my house, so they can stay out of my house. And then we can coexist. Anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts, or let me know if you enjoy walking, hiking, or anything outdoors, or if you enjoy and appreciate ants. I'm still willing to hear your reasons for it. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. And until next time, take care.